Hey there, and welcome to the
Fazbear Entertainment Security Archive.
Now this video is a lot different compared to my previous story breakdowns. After all, this isn't a game we're covering, but a lore archive for the fan game Fazbear Tycoon, which was cancelled about a year ago now. Back when the game was still in development, this archive contained information that served as world building for Fazbear Tycoon. Of course, while the game is cancelled, the night test demo and archive are still available on GameJolt, and I recently took a look through this archive and I thought it'd be interesting to try and lay out the world that this game was going to take place in. Now, I've made a video on this archive before, back in 2022, and I pretty much covered all of the documents, just reading through everything line by line, and because of that, I don't want this video to just be a copy and paste of that. So the idea is that for gameplay, which I usually use in these videos, right, since we're not dealing with the actual game, I'm going to try and grab whatever gameplay from other fan games that I've played in order to try and best fit with whatever I'm talking about, kind of just to work as some sort of visual aid, instead of just looking at documents and just lines and lines of text. I'm also not going to go through the documents line by line. I'm just going to try and give cliff notes on what's going on in this event, right, and how that kind of contributes to the state of the world at certain points in time. It's pretty much going to try and take a more general view to how the world is in this game's universe, essentially. Now, I'll be going in chronological order from the first entry made in the early 80s to current events that take place in 2026. However, some entries actually do not have any dates provided, so those are going to go more towards the end, where they probably fit the best, if anything, and just going to be mentioned in general. One more note I want to make is that this game is kind of building off not only the FNAF in-game lore, but also information from the FNAF books. So I'm going to obviously take assumptions from what happens in the books and what happens in the games to try and better inform what's going on in this archive. The overall goal, since we don't know what happens in the game itself, right, is to try and see how does the world of Fazbear Tycoon look like before the events of the game, essentially. I want to also mention that there is some information that I got from the Fazbear Tycoon wiki, as well as images from both the FNAF and Fazbear Tycoon wiki, and as a result, because the Fazbear Tycoon wiki isn't necessarily from the developers, there could be some incorrect information, so take what's said here with a bit of salt. With that said, let's get into it. First off, what is the
Fazbear Entertainment Security Archive?
Or FISA, which I'll be saying from now on. FISA was created by Henry Emily as a database containing important information and events in connection with Fazbear Entertainment, such as animatronic incidents, for example. In order to access this archive, you need to enter a password, which is Charlotte. This archive was created in the early 1980s and has continually been updated up to 2026. Almost every entry requires a password in order to access it, with the password usually being related to the entry's content. Before getting to the actual information though, there is something odd about the nature of the archive itself. For example, if you enter the phrase "Are you there?" when prompted for the password at the very beginning, a text line stating "I'm still here" or "I never left" appears, and the screen begins to flash rapidly all of a sudden until the archive crashes. Now, according to the Fazbear Tycoon wiki, the image that was flashing on screen after typing this phrase is some sort of animatronic entity, or face, I suppose, and it seems to indicate that this entity is somehow entangled or connected within the archive itself, watching us as we interact with the archive, right? When we, for example, try to access it or contact it by asking, "Are you there?" This is backed up by some of the dialogue from the 1.5 version of FISA, where, according to the Fazbear Tycoon wiki, you would get random dialogue when opening certain files, such as
Warning. File transfer and/or deletion detected. Messing with Fesa files will result in suspension of your whitelist membership. The archive must be completed. You're not supposed to be here. Something's wrong.
One potential theory I have about this entity that's watching us interact with the archive is that we aren't Henry. We are probably the protagonist of Fazbear Tycoon to some extent, right? But if the idea is that we aren't Henry, yet we have access to the archive, that would interest the entity into keeping an eye on us, making sure we aren't messing around with the archive in any ways it's not supposed to be messed around with, etc. Now, on the other hand, if you enter the password incorrectly 3 times, the text box will disappear, and the archive's computerized voice will say, "You are not Henry, Goodbye, and the archive closes. Now, one of the strange things is the line of dialogue suggesting that the entity wants the archive to be completed. Now, I don't know what this is supposed to mean. Obviously, this is from a point in time when the archive was still being worked on, so maybe the entity wanted more information put in the archive, which would have happened at a certain point when the game was in development, but obviously that never came to pass. But that pretty much concludes the major interactions from this entity with regards to the archive, and I don't think they really show up anywhere else. However, there is another character that's heavily involved with the Fazbear Entertainment Security Archive, and this character is referred to as Z in the Fazbear Tycoon wiki. Quote, Z is a mysterious character that is responsible for the reveal of Fazbear Entertainment Security Archive in universe. Not much is known about Z other than the fact that he is talented at hacking, and he aims to expose Fazbear Entertainment. Whenever FISA is updated, he will leave a message with his signature in the Fazbear Tycoon game page and give hints to crack the file passwords. Z is also present in the Fazbear Tycoon Discord server, very occasionally sending cryptic messages in the server. Now, this is probably all back when the game was actually still in development, because there was a period of time where this archive didn't have 20 different entries. It was slowly building up and passwords had to be kind of discovered. So that's the only honorable mention I really have with regards to figures that really deal with the archive besides this mysterious entity. I figured I should at least mention that since there is no mention of this character at all in the archive. Which means we can finally move on to the contents of FISA. The first entry was made at some point in 1982, the Feast Report number 1, Animatronic Performance Incident number 4, Her Debut, locked behind the password Forgotten. Now, some entries will have redacted information, such as the date, animatronic unit involved, or even locations and names within the entry's contents. Now, the information from this entry was extracted from someone's personal journal, detailing the description of this animatronic unit, which resembles Deity from FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night. This was a character that was proposed initially by William, a mischievous troublemaker that would sport a more recognizable human face that the kids can recognize and relate to. Safe to say, this was the design that was looked upon fondly by both Henry and William. Unfortunately, the customers heavily disagreed.
Playing performance incident recording 001.
Alright kids, I have a big surprise to show you all today. We here at
Redacted.
a brand new member of the gang we want to show you. She's eager to meet you all. Please put your hands together for the mischievous trickster.
Redacted.
Hi kids,
Redacted.
I've heard that you've all been excited to meet me. Here I am.
Henry, hold the curtain. Pull the bloody curtain.
This was a total failure, leaving a class size of toddlers and parents alike horrified. Despite their attempts to create a character that would be more approachable to children, they've done the exact opposite, and this would eventually lead to lawsuits from parents, leading to the destruction and permanent omission of this character from memory, leaving this unit to be forgotten.
I don't know why I ever thought this was a good idea.
Same here.
I told you some of the parents are trying to sue us, yeah?
Yup, he told me.
Alright. Well, I've got schematics to burn and parents to apologize to. Make sure you bury that thing.
I can't say I blame Henry for this, even his own daughter hated it, and her favorite character is a marionette designed to scare children into following the rules in the first place. Now, Henry briefly mentions the possibility that William's intent was for the audience to react as badly as they did, but he doesn't explain why. This could just be a little bit of insight into William's character, a little bit of a tease revealing what William is truly like, but that's as far as it goes. Not the best start for the beginning of FISA, but this is only the tip of the iceberg. Now for our next entry, we'll be talking about the Yellow Bear sightings, and this entry was made in 2026, and I know I said we'd be going through this chronologically, but this entry actually has information starting from 1985 and kind of goes in sections throughout the years, so we'll be revisiting this entry often as we go through the archive. And the only reason why this has made it into the archive in the first place is because of how it has been the one lingering rumor to persist throughout the company's lifespan, an entity that has followed the Fazbear brand for decades. Starting in 1985, employees and customers have reported sightings of what appeared to be a phantom during regular business hours. A phantom that was described as a ghastly Fredbear, which was assumed to just be a case of nostalgic hallucinations thanks to fond memories of Fredbear's family diner. However, new evidence has proven contrary to this idea due to the entity's evolution over the years. At first, when the sightings began, the phantom was described as a figure resembling Fredbear with some inaccuracies, such as pale yellow fur and a top hat that was similar to the Gen 2 Freddy models. However, this phantom was not hostile, and only made witnesses feel a mix of nostalgia and queasiness, which was easily brushed off. This version of Phantom, I believe, is the spirit of William's youngest son before the events of the MCI. Throughout the next 2 years, sightings have slowly increased, with the entity now appearing to be a broken yellow Freddy, which was missing an ear and several chunks of its suit. There are even reports of it appearing as a giant head at the end of hallways. At this point, the entity was now hostile if you provoked it using lights. Witnessing this entity would now cause weakness and severe sleep deprivation, and now children started to see this entity as well, drawing it and asking staff about it. At this point, the MCI has already occurred, which brings me to believe that Cassidy has now become a part of Golden Freddy, explaining the entity's newfound hostility. But now we move on to another entry, from 1988, which is titled, New Members of the Band, with the password Candy. The entry is dated May 13, 1988, where a string of unfortunate events at Candy's Burgers and Fries resulted in their acquisition by Fazbear Entertainment for a grand total of $20 million. And prior to this, another competitor of Fazbear Entertainment was also bought out by them. This sounds like an attempt by Fazbear Entertainment to monopolize the animatronic entertainment industry, considering that 1985 and 1987 were some of the company's most controversial years, and so that might have resulted in some sort of business downturn where they need to grab more market share. Now, back to the Yellow Bear sightings. Throughout the 4-year span from 1988 to 1992, these sightings have remained constant, but they've started to occur throughout multiple locations, especially near Fazbear warehouses and storage units. The descriptions for these sightings remained the same, except for the fact that the figure now looked more solid and visible than before, and this entity has seemingly traveled from location to location, quote-unquote, appearing outside one of our warehouses one week and inside a completely different one the next. Employees reported feelings of sleep deprivation, along with having violent thoughts after encountering the figure. But all of a sudden, the sighting stopped after it was spotted near the Gen 4 models of the main Fazbear band. It reportedly sat down next to the models and made strange, incoherent noises that were picked up by CCTV. Any employee that witnessed all of this during their night shift reported that they felt the being was happy while sitting with the band, eventually vanishing. Now, the happiness that the employee witnessed might be a result of this spirit finally reuniting with others like him, which is kind of tragic considering obviously we were talking about dead child spirits, but that might explain the sense of happiness that the night guard sensed from Golden Freddy. However, a year later, the sightings returned with quote-unquote worrying frequency as new locations opened, with many customers and employees reporting sightings of a carbon copy Gen 4 Freddy model, but with yellow fur, which looked more solid and definitive compared to earlier sightings. Sightings of the figure caused fatigue, extreme sleep deprivation, and uncharacteristic desires to hurt people, along with rabid paranoia. Due to the behavior caused by the sightings, all of the children's drawings referring to the figure were taken down immediately. However, even when employees didn't see this figure, they could feel its presence, which was consistent with CCTV footage that captured audio similar to the ones the figure made as it traveled from multiple locations. These noises were also heard in CCTV recordings that captured the death of a man named Guy, suggesting the figure's potential involvement in the incident, despite a lack of further information on this incident in the archive. For the next 3 decades, there would no longer be any sightings of the Yellow Bear, after one last sighting was reported where the bear was near the safe room. Despite the lack of sightings, its presence could still be felt at this location. Now, I'm not really sure how to explain the entity's activity between 1988 and 1992 with regards to moving or being spotted at numerous locations, because the assumption is that these spirits can't go too far from their actual suits. So that only leaves me to believe that the suit is being moved by someone unknown to Fazbear Entertainment throughout this period of time. Now, we know after 1992, it seems like the bear was left happy after kind of reuniting with the Gen 4 models, which should be possessed by children at this point. But then it returns in 1993 with more harmful side effects, which might be Cassidy returning, since this is also the year that Afton gets spring-locked in a suit and trapped in the safe room, resulting in a lack of sightings for 3 decades, which would also back up the fact that Cassidy, Golden Freddy, right, would be last spotted near the safe room. Now, of course, 1993 is a pretty big year in FNAF lore, right? And for Fazbear Entertainment in this case as well, with the reemergence and eventual disappearance of the Yellow Bear sightings. But now, Fazbear Entertainment has to look after itself as a company. Hence, Fazbear Entertainment introduced the Extra Revenue Project, with the archive password being mediocre, when Fazbear Entertainment began the production of the Mediocre Melodies. These characters were made due to a combination of customer decline and production issues, which would be solved by these mediocre melodies since they were cheaper to make and repair compared to the main characters and could overall increase entertainment and profits. They also served as a surprise bonus attraction that wouldn't take away too much attention from the main band. However, there were some managerial concerns regarding these mediocre melodies, but they were required to use them for at least 2 to 3 shows before sending them to another franchise or risk termination. However, this wouldn't last long, as the Gen 4 restaurants would close down, and all mediocre melodies would be packed and shipped to the nearest Fazbear warehouse at a later point during the 1990s. These characters are now being rented out to both customers and small businesses to help Fazbear Entertainment stay financially stable during these hard times. However, they won't be down for long as they have multiple small projects in the works. Ultimately, this was a bit of a failed attempt to get out of the financial slump that Fazbear Entertainment had found itself for multiple years, but they will always come back. Animatronic Performance Incident number 534 occurred in 1993, with the password print in the archive. Now, this incident occurred a few days after the establishment of restaurant number 256, where at 7:56 p.m., the Freddy Fazbear unit began to twitch and spasm on stage during a performance, refusing to respond to remote and manual commands. This led the manager to close early and call for an off-site maintenance crew to investigate the issue, which was beyond the on-site team's expertise. One of the members of the off-site crew, Jesse Asfield, approached the unit and was attacked by it as Fred repeatedly said, "Criminal detected." Jesse then deactivates the unit using a controlled shock device, and further examination revealed that the unit had a facial recognition module from the Gen 3 units, which causes the system to overload and mistake customers and employees as criminals. This would lead to a formal warning to all locations to not allow use of these modules in any units that are not part of the same generation. Now sure, it's totally possible that this was an incompatibility issue, but there is also a possibility that the facial recognition module correctly found the criminal but wasn't capable of processing that information, causing in the tech to kind of corrupt itself and see everyone as criminals in this case, which is why it would attack Jesse. But I think in this case I'm more inclined to follow up with the first explanation. After all, why would it attack Jesse after detecting it as a criminal but not the real criminal, quote unquote, that would have been detected while it was performing? Just seems a bit too complicated and makes no sense for it to be like that. Now, at the end of the millennia, July 3rd, 1999, we have another incident where a suit performer was sent to a psychiatric hospital, and the password of this entry is RWQFSFASXC, a reference to Shadow Bonnie. Suit performer Mark was admitted to a psychiatric hospital after they were found in their home in a state of psychosis, repeating phrases such as, "I wore the suit, I wore the skin of death, can't say his name, I see him everywhere, no lights, if there are lights, there are shadows." Mark would be evaluated with significant schizophrenia and psychosis, and during assessments would mention a figure that only he could see, a tall, looming black rabbit made of pure blackness. When he was asked for the figure's name, Mark violently screamed in sheer panic and terror, to the point of urination. Mark was a suit performer for the Spring Bonnie suit, just like William Afton, whose name is actually redacted in this archive. Mark would then go on to spend the last 5 years of his life at the hospital before inexplicably dying in 2004. Now, Henry noted that this incident was included in the archive due to the quote, "I wore the skin of death," relating to a suit incident that occurred in 1995, an incident that's not in this archive. It was also noted that the amount of time that he was in the hospital matched the amount of time he spent working for Fazbear Entertainment, down to the exact number of days. Even more so, the figure that Mark described fit a famous legend spread among the night guards of multiple Fazbear pizzerias throughout the decades, describing a shadowy phantom resembling Bonnie, which would go on to be referred to as Shadow Bonnie. And this entry also contains a drawing of the Shadow's face multiple times, drawn by Mark, supposedly. Now, I personally have never really understood the Shadow characters from FNAF 2, Shadow Freddy, Shadow Bonnie. They're arguably the two characters I read off in my mind the most, because I don't really remember seeing them used that often, or at all really, besides FNAF 2 and maybe Ultimate Custom Night. With that said though, we know that this is a figure of legend that has been with the company for decades, which means that Mark's quotes referencing a 1995 incident wouldn't actually be Shadow Bonnie's origin. I like the quote by Mark saying, "I wore the skin of death," because there are two interpretations to this quote. One obvious interpretation is that it is a literal skin of death, the spring lock suits. If they snap shut while you're in it, you die. Death is usually an occurrence in these suits if they malfunction. Another interpretation is the fact that the suit in question, the Spring Bonnie suit, was used to lure children to their deaths, making it a symbolic suit of death. A suit that spells doom for children that are lured by it. After this, there's a large gap of inactivity in the archive, as there aren't any entries in the 2000s up to even the early 2010s, up until December 24, 2016, where a tragedy referred to as the Laurel PD slaughter occurred. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Sergeant Gerald, Lieutenants Harry and Simon, and Deputy Bradley were all found dead at Laurel PD in Laurel, Montana, after being snowed in for days due to a severe blizzard passing by. Simon was found in the vent system completely skinned, with their shredded, degloved skin left behind in the garage alongside Bradley's remains, while Gerald and Harry were found by the emergency exit and toilet cubicle respectively. However, one survivor was found outside, lying in the snow, Deputy Raymond, who would be rushed to Billings Clinic Hospital and spent weeks recovering. Once he was stable, he described a large metallic mass of wires that were the skin of one of his colleagues, Lieutenant Simon. The mass went on to murder the rest of his co-workers while he fled to safety. Of course, these bizarre circumstances led to Raymond being charged and placed on trial for first-degree murder once he was fit and healthy. However, this wouldn't last long, as he would inevitably be stated unfit to stand trial and is admitted to a mental institute for several years, as he was given a diagnosis for psychosis. Eventually, he would pass away after being transferred to a psychiatric hospital in Utah. Due to these events and the testimony by Raymond, Fazbear Entertainment launched a covert investigation at Laurel PD, where they found remnant signatures belonging to Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy and Bonbon, and Ballora with the mini arenas in and out of the building. Fazbear Entertainment's leading theory is that following the breach at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, the remnant amalgamation, aka Ennard, would travel north to Montana, where they got caught in the blizzard, leading them to take shelter in the vent system of Laurel PD. Once Simon discovered them in the vents, he would be killed, and the amalgamation would wear Simon's skin, similar to their escape from Circus Babies. However, the other officers would realize this, and that would lead to their deaths, with Raymond being the only survivor. This theory matches closely with Raymond's retelling of the events. During the time they were snowed in, nothing really happened the first 2 nights, but on the 3rd night, they noticed things being moved around randomly, as well as metallic banging sounds coming from somewhere unknown in the building, which bothered Simon the most. As a result, Simon would go on to search several times for the sound's origin, but never found it, while everyone else didn't pay much attention to it. On the 4th night, Simon claimed that he saw something looking at him from within one of the vent grates, a small pair of eyes looking down on him, but this fell on deaf ears. On the 5th night, a power outage occurred, leading to a loss of heating and lighting, which leads us to night 6, where Simon had finally had enough, and was determined to find out the source of the noise one way or another, which resulted in him being gone for about a half hour, when all of a sudden, he returned, but remained silent and went to sleep on the sofa. At this point, the banging noise had stopped, but when the others asked Simon about the sound's origin, he didn't respond. When morning came, the officers woke to the smell of death, leading to the officers splitting into teams of 2 to investigate the source of the smell. Raymond, Simon, and Brad would investigate the garage while Sergeant Harry searched the offices. The garage had a foul-smelling odor, which came from the vents, which is when Bradley found a vent grate loose from its hinges and drenched in blood. All of a sudden, Simon began to wriggle and writhe, letting out an ear-piercing screech, shedding his skin, and revealing a massive entanglement of wires and eyeballs. Before Raymond could comprehend what he just witnessed, the mass of wires lunged towards Bradley and ripped into him. Out of sheer horror, Raymond left Bradley behind, ran past Sergeant Harry without saying a word, who eventually went to go help out Brad. He would crash through a window and run outside for around 50 feet before collapsing on the ground, where he would inevitably be found. A horrible tragedy that, in the end, had no real survivors. The only question now is, where could Ennard have gone? With that being the only archive entry in this decade, we move on to the 2020s, starting with the archive entry Document Email 347, the only entry without a password. The email in question is between the owner of Fazbear Frights and a night guard that's currently working there, assumingly Michael in FNAF 3, on August 18th, 2023. The email in question is pretty basic, with the owner giving instructions to Michael about how to deal with Springtrap so that he doesn't damage any equipment. However, what's interesting is that Henry was aware of this interaction and was kept up to date on any further discoveries related to this document. It indicates how much he kept a close eye on William's whereabouts around this time, and probably up to the point where William escapes the horror attraction. Finally, in 2024, after barely any activity from Fazbear Entertainment and a continuing decline in Fazbear restaurants and attractions, they introduced the Fazbear Worldwide Initiative, a collaborative project between Fazbear Entertainment and an unknown company, which will resume the production of animatronic units from past generations that aren't being used, like the mediocre Melodies, for example. This initiative also started the Fazbear Funtime service, along with other purchasable services where customers can order past characters to entertain them personally at home. Characters would be packed and shipped to customers' homes and perform either as individuals or a group if multiple characters are ordered. Meanwhile, any animatronics that aren't used in this initiative would be put up for auction for other companies and smaller Fazbear establishments. Clearly, this is Fazbear's most ambitious attempt at getting back into the limelight and leaving their controversial past behind, but not without a few caveats. Besides their attempts to cover up what fees would be charged for these services, they also need to keep track of what characters they are producing and which characters are quote-unquote active entities so that they do not confuse malfunctioning units for entities. Because of the Laurel PD slaughter, we know that Fazbear Entertainment is aware of Remnant and knows which animatronic units have remnant signals like Funtime Freddy, Ballora, Funtime Foxy, and as a result of this, I'm pretty sure this is pretty much their attempt to make sure that any unit that appears to be malfunctioning is actually just malfunctioning and not being possessed by a spirit and just freaking out in order to prevent more animatronic incidents from happening in the future. 1 year later, from October 10th to October 12th in 2025, archive entry Lefty Unit 002 testing logs was submitted, with the password lock. These testing logs were part of Henry's development and testing process for Lefty, the unit that would go on to capture the puppet and bring her to the FNAF 6 location. These testing logs cover the basic functions of the unit, such as its capabilities to walk long distances without incident, resulting in the head's reinforcement, and limb holes becoming narrower to prevent the puppet's escape. Once the unit succeeded in bringing back the test target, Henry sent it off to go and find the puppet. Our final entry in 2025 is titled The Message with the password Guardian. This took place on November 3rd, 2025, a month after Lefty was sent out to capture the puppet. It's a message from Henry Emily to Michael, who assisted him with the plan to burn down the restaurant with the animatronics inside. Unfortunately, this plan has failed, and now activation and reappearance of multiple entities have started to occur. The plan is to meet at an unknown location on the 14th at 3:15 p.m., though the choice is up to them if they want to appear. Honestly, I haven't really thought about Henry's fate after the events of FNAF 6. I always assume that he dies, given the nature of his final speech, but it's interesting to see that in this reality he survives. I don't really know if at this point in the FNAF lore he ever came back or anything like that, not to my knowledge, I'm pretty sure, but it's an interesting alternate reality where he is pretty much back and he's still trying to figure out how to stop Springtrap and the other animatronics to put everything to rest, since the FNAF 6 paragraph 4 plan didn't really work. Before I move on to the year 2026, there are 3 archive entries I'd like to go over, since this is probably the best time to address them before reaching the end. These are the entries that have no actual date, so the nature as to when they took place is pretty ambiguous on its own. The first entry is the Lefty 2.0 blueprints with the password purpose. This entry is basically a blueprint showing all of Lefty's components, especially the ones that would be used to capture the puppet. From what we can see on the blueprint, it seems like the plan was for Lefty to use the audio message record and receiver and stimuli projector to lure the puppet close enough to Lefty, with sensors being used to track down the puppet. It would then trap the puppet and place it in the containment tank, entering extension mode, which fit the shape of the puppet. With regards to when this entry took place, it's not really clear, obviously. We know it's before October 10th, 2025. Safe to say it's probably within the same year, but I guess that detail isn't super important, though it would give an idea as to how long he was formulating this paragraph 4 plan, right? Now, the second entry is titled Cloaked Figure with the password 1280, referring to the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, and the Stitch Wraith. The entry consists of eyewitness reports of a skeletal creature draped in scraps, wearing a crimson-lined mask, a figure that has been documented heavily online, with the most notable instance involving a video from a redacted location at 2 and 3 in the morning. In many aspects, this figure has been compared to another popular legend related to Fazbear Entertainment, Golden Freddy. Now, I have read the Fazbear Frights books, but I can't say I remember the Stitch Wraith very well, considering that character was involved in the bonus storyline that went on throughout the books. I understand that this figure was possessed by two spirits, similar to how Golden Freddy is possessed by two spirits, one quote-unquote good and one quote-unquote vengeful. With that said, it's cool to hear how this world was including events not just from the games, as well as additional events not mentioned anywhere, but also events from the books as well. Despite how some of those stories end up being pretty wacky, it is cool to see its involvement, because it also opens up the idea of like, what else could we have seen in this game and the lore, right? From the Fazbear Frights books to even imagine the Pizzaplex books, for example. The third and final entry before moving on to 2026 involves the Circus Babies Pizza World Miscellaneous Unit Archive, with the password Weirdo. Very odd there. This is essentially an archive document on a series of miscellaneous animatronics that were made alongside the Gen 5 units, produced by Afton Robotics, with very little known about them. Now, this archive describes animatronics by way of their generation. For example, the Gen 3 animatronics are the toy animatronics because of the fact that they had facial recognition modules, which is backed up by one of the other archive entries regarding an animatronic incident. So based off that, I'm pretty sure the Gen 5 units in this case, since they were produced by Afton Robotics, are supposed to be the Funtime animatronics, Circus Baby Ballora. I figured I should at least mention that since I never really explained that beforehand, though it might also be a bit obvious, I guess, I'm not sure, but in case you were wondering about the generation stuff, there you go. Now, some of these units are very familiar, like the mini-arenas that accompanied Ballora. These were tested to see if they could distract targets and repair/damage machinery. These tests revealed they were capable of both, especially with machines of larger size. They would then be sent to be reintegrated with the main subject, assumingly Ballora. Now, this part about the mini arenas reminds me of the story Room for One More from the Fazbear Frights books, where a security guard is named Stanley was, I think, guarding some sort of underground facility. It might have actually been Circus Babies Entertainment and Rental, though I don't know if that name was actually mentioned. One of the nights, he finds a mini arena doll, takes it home, it disappears. By the end of the story, I think it's revealed that the mini arenas literally enter Stanley. Like, they literally just climb inside of Stanley, and Stanley throughout this process was feeling worse and worse and worse, and they were literally climbing inside him through the mouth at the very end. The part about them saying these tests revealed they were capable of repairing/damaging machinery of larger size, it just made me think of that scenario, that story, which is a little disconcerting, to be honest. Now, while I was able to deduce the mini arenas in this archive, I wasn't able to figure out, for the most part, who everyone else was. I pretty much gave theories as to who I thought they were, but the Fazbear Tycoon wiki does actually inform on what each of these units are supposed to be. So what I'll do is let you hear me pretty much theorize on what I thought these units were, while having a text bar showing what these units actually are in the world itself. Next, we also have a small wooden puppet in a striped outfit, which was experimented for fluid movement using a joint and pulley system, which ended up failing. This was a design that was inevitably sent to Fazbear Entertainment as they paid for that information apparently. No clue what this is supposed to be. We also have a small hand puppet meant to react and respond to commands from its authoritative counterpart, which sounds a lot like Bonbon and Funtime Freddy. Next, we have a large mesh of wires controlled by basic AI, which is meant to adapt and mimic various forms and suits, which sounds an awful lot like the Mimic from Security Breach and the other series of books, Tales from the Pizzaplex. Finally, there was an AI using an unknown appearance, experimented to see if digital consciousness could be transferred, which needed further testing. This probably connects to Afton's attempt to create a digital version of himself, which we would see in Glitch Trap from Help Wanted, assuming that this would ever happen in the game's timeline, because obviously in the official FNAF lore, right, he dies in FNAF 6, but he has a digital version. Maybe that's the idea they're trying to go for there as well. This could also be connected to the entity that's meshed in with the archive, someone's digital consciousness that is now part of FISA. However, considering that this is Afton robotics technology, there's no reason to suggest how it would have gotten access to the archive in the first place, unless Afton used that AI to keep an eye on the documented information that Henry stores here. After all, this archive was started in the 80s. What's to say that Afton had access back then and found a way to keep having access even after Henry figured out what Afton was doing? The next unit we have is a variation of Baby based off FISA information suggesting that Unit A1 refers to Circus Baby. This unit was tested to see if it can store/transfer various energies, which resulted in failure. Now this one I'm not really so sure what they mean by various energies. Could this be related to Remnant, or I guess maybe since we're borrowing from the books, Agony? Remnant and Agony, way over my head, but that's pretty much the idea that I'm getting when I hear about various energies. A lot of different units here overall, but Henry didn't have much information on them and was still looking for more. For the most part, all of these units have succeeded in their experimentation, except for the Baby variation and the wooden striped puppet. But now it's 2026, the final year, which would end up being one of Fazbear Entertainment's busiest years, and we can't forget about their most popular icon, Golden Freddy. After 3 decades, sightings finally resume, where customers of the Fazbear Worldwide Initiative reported sights of phantoms and visions when renting out certain animatronics. However, its form has changed drastically, appearing as a tall and deformed abomination, with stretched out blackened limbs, a thin contorted body, and sporting a wretched grin. This design doesn't resemble a single animatronic unit, suggesting that it's now beyond the Golden Freddy visage. Those that reported sightings also mentioned that animatronics started malfunctioning, going haywire before shutting down. As for side effects, instead of violent emotions, they now cause feelings of lingering depression, making the entity seem quote-unquote weaker, but is still considered a serious danger with worries it'll find in newest establishment. Throughout 30 plus years, it has been the most persistent phenomenon to haunt Fazbear Entertainment, stalking the company and making itself visible to anyone, which is why this figure was ever documented in FISA to begin with. Considering that Paragraph 4 has failed, this could explain the new side effects that Golden Freddy has, along with the change in its appearance, which is quite bizarre now that it's distancing itself from Fazbear Entertainment in general. Despite it having quote-unquote weaker side effects, it's arguably the most malevolent it's ever appeared to be, which leaves me wondering, why did it appear now and not in 2025 when the fake pizzeria was made to lure everyone to the building? In fact, that's something that personally has kind of eluded me throughout the FNAF lore in general. I don't know if it was ever explained or even questioned, but why doesn't Golden Freddy show up in FNAF 6, right? You'd think with everyone meeting up there, one of the most pivotal figures in the game's history would have been there. Golden Freddy, that been there since the first game, right? And especially, we have the puppet, we have the Funtime amalgamation, right? Baby, Afton, the whole gang's there, but Golden Freddy is oddly enough the only missing character, which I don't know, like, it hasn't really clicked for me until now, but it's kind of weird that they never show up at that point. Regardless, we can now move on to our first dated entry on April 5th, 2026. Animatronic Salvage Incident 337. The password is dinner time, where a broken down Gen 2 Chica was found in Utah at an old Freddy's location. Long story short, it was deemed salvageable, and when one of the mechanics attempted to realign its jaw, it bit on their hand immediately, deeming the unit unstable, which was subsequently paralyzed with controlled shocks. This could be an effect of the entity slowly reactivating and reappearing like Henry said in 2025, or it could just be a mechanical malfunction. Our next archive entry is figure sighting with the password eject. On an unknown date in 2026, a figure was spotted in a scrapyard, gathering old knives, scrap sheets of metal, and other various metallic objects. The individual described the creature as a mass of rusty wires and a loosely put together outer casing, using broken items for bulking on its arms and torso, with a head similar to a bear. It had a total of 4 arms, 2 on its back and 1 on each side of its torso. The individual noticed that the figure convulsed and writhed randomly, specifically when looking directly at lights. As it moved, it emitted scraping and squeaking noises. Since the individual managed to go undetected by the figure, it's unclear as to whether it is hostile or not. There was an update made to this entry which noted another sighting of the same figure in Utah, where the individual was attacked by the figure while looking for junk parts. They pulled on a strange pile of junk which ended up being the figure's back. It had teeth made of blades, and portions of its face were built out of bent metal and had cold yellow eyes. Luckily, the individual turned on their flashlight, which made the figure scream in pain, giving the individual a chance to run. On the right hand side of the entry, you can see a hand-drawn description of the entity, resembling a Freddy head with 2 appendages behind it and a torso with 2 arms. This is likely Molten Freddy, who escaped the FNAF 6 fire and is trying to rebuild themselves using whatever scrap and junk they can find as they head towards Utah for an undisclosed reason. Our next entry is Fazbear Entertainment Warehouse Raided with the password Division. The archive contains an image of what appears to be a hybrid Funtime Foxy / Ballora animatronic, and refers to the 8th of September 2026, where a break-in occurred at a Fazbear Entertainment warehouse in Nevada, resulting in the death / disappearance of all security and cleaning personnel. Any bodies that were recovered showed signs of extended exposure of 25k volts, resulting in their bodies being charred beyond recognition. The warehouse's generator was sabotaged with a puncture, leading to a blackout that probably initiated the break-in. Investigators found that decommissioned animatronics Stargaze Ballora and pieces of Stargaze Foxy were missing from storage unit C4-AE, which are different from Funtime Foxy and Ballora, who were found to be present during the break-in thanks to the remnant trackers. At this point, they are believed to have separated from the remnant amalgamation, which would back up the potential Molten Freddy sighting at some point this year. There was also an unknown third party, which corrupted all security footage, leaving behind a text folder titled LOL. The running theory is that the warehouse was subject to a cyber attack during the break-in, but they couldn't find any signs of viruses or sabotage. Funnily enough, at the bottom of this entry, you can see a message left behind by L, stating, "I was just giving a friend a little helping hand." So clearly Lolbit is the one that hacked the warehouse and even gained access to FISA. We also have 2 new variants of Ballora and Foxy, of the Stargaze variety. Now, according to the Fazbear Tycoon wiki, the entity in this image is actually referred to as Feral Ballora, which is a fusion of Funtime Foxy and Ballora, while also using parts of the Stargaze variants that I mentioned earlier. So that's the most that we really know about what happened to those Stargaze variants. They pretty much went to become another type of amalgamation. And that leaves us wondering, for what purpose are they retrieving these decommissioned units? Maybe this is because one man has survived against all the odds. A few days after this break-in, another entry was submitted, titled Missing Individuals, with the password being Father. An image of Springtrap is shown reaching out to whoever took this photo, and you can clearly tell Afton's in the suit, and Henry knows this, as he described the animatronic unit involved as him. On the 13th of September 2026, 3 indie filmmakers were reported missing in Hurricane, Utah, named Courtney, Kevin, and Edward. Their goal was to investigate and prove the validity of Utah's urban myths and legends, most specifically the Utah Harriman, whose description is similar to Springtrap. Around 6 weeks after this incident, in late October, a severed hand was found by a sewage maintenance worker after unblocking a drainage pipe. This hand belonged to Courtney, one of the 3 filmmakers, and all 3 are presumed dead. A damaged disposable camera belonging to Kevin was found, which only had the one image of Springtrap. We also have an audio log from Henry.
He survived the fire and has been out there all this time, hunting, claiming more souls and destroying more lives. I should have known it was him as soon as I heard about this Utah Hairman thing. People say those boys were lost to the storm, but they're wrong. I'm one of the only people, maybe the only person, who bears the curse of knowing the truth. The man who found the hand said that the only way it could have gotten there is if somebody placed it there, deliberately. And he's right. He is taunting me. Even after so long, he knows I'm watching. I need to stop him. I know where he is. And he doesn't have the backing he used to. I have the advantage. I missed my opportunity back in '85. I'm not missing it again.
So yeah, paragraph 4 failed hard. It didn't even kill the one guy that was hopefully gonna be dead among everyone there. The only one that really deserved to die. He's still out there, and he's taunting Henry. This probably explains all of that new activity that Henry brought up, the Molten Freddy pretty much recovering slowly, Ballora and Foxy raiding the warehouse with the help of Lil Bit. The question is, who else is going to get involved, because we also have Golden Freddy undergoing quite a few changes. It looks like they're all gearing up to go after Afton one more time. Our penultimate archive entry is Gateway to Old Wounds, with the password Suffer. This is denoted as Anomalous Location Report 167. This is the only entry where the date is glitching with the text, "Why does it matter?" And the animatronics involved has the text, "Everyone is here." The purpose of this entry was to archive the reporting of a strange anomalous geographical phenomena that occurred in Utah. The anomaly was a large bottomless hole on William Afton's property, stretching 15 meters in width and length. The area surrounding this hole used to be a lively forest, which is now burnt beyond all recognition. Any attempts to reach/find the bottom of this hole via drone and living personnel have all failed, with no remains recovered. The hole resembles a cave/sinkhole with large burn marks around the edges and within its walls, with some burn marks resembling handprints. As for the Afton residence, it's completely gone, whether due to burning down from the flames or falling into the hole itself as it opened. The anomaly has some bizarre traits which warranted its inclusion in FISA, such as the secretion of a strange dark gas-like substance only visible through remnant detection lenses. The temperature within these areas heat up dramatically at random intervals, with lowest temperature recordings being around 150 degrees Fahrenheit and the highest recordings reading 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Observers have also heard screams from within the hole, and occasionally had a feral desire to harm the closest living thing to them. Thanks to eyewitness accounts, there is actually a rough timeline of the anomaly's origin. At first, around 12 a.m., a 6.0 magnitude earthquake was felt by residents, which stopped around 1 a.m., where a deep, low rumble would be heard by locals in the general area of the anomaly. Some of these locals would then investigate the sound's origin. Around 2 a.m., authorities were called to investigate this disturbance, which led to them arriving at the Afton household, where they heard the rumbling sound, while others also claimed to have heard voices. At 3 a.m., a slight cracking sound was observed by authorities as temperatures began to rise despite the cool temperature at night. This cracking got even louder at 4 a.m., with temperatures continuing to increase, causing some authorities to leave, and even one passing out due to heat stroke. The cracking sound got even louder at 5 a.m., with the Afton residence foundation beginning to shift. Because of this unbelievable heat, authorities had to leave, but they left behind some cameras to observe the area. At 6 a.m., the ground began to shift once again, and the surrounding area experienced a 7.3 magnitude earthquake, but only around the Afton home, which is when the ground began to open up and the hole would appear and swallow most of the house. Flames erupted from the hole, and a loud screeching sound was heard, along with chiming of a clock, and a giant figure began to crawl out of the hole, which is when the cameras went static. After the recordings ended, a few minutes passed until a forest fire was observed to have been growing around the area, resulting in the arrival of the fire department. When Fazbear investigators used remnant detection filters on the recording, they noticed a huge cloud of the gas-like substance had burst from the hole before it ended. After this incident, the surrounding area started to be filled with broken, burnt remains of various units from multiple generations from Fazbear's history. This would lead to the final archive entry: giant mechanical monster spotted wandering the countryside, with the password HELL. A giant mechanical entity was found wandering the countryside following a recent destructive forest fire, directly referencing the events from the previous entry. Fazbear Entertainment began investigating when the entity was reported to consist of multiple animatronic parts from both old and unknown generations of animatronics from both Fazbear Entertainment and Afton Robotics. Despite such severe rumors, Fazbear Entertainment bribed witnesses and the press to keep quiet about the situation. This entity was noted to have a vested interest in abandoned Fazbear warehouses and facilities, but is hostile and will attack anything living or mechanical that gets near it. The entity's height is approximately 15 feet, which has been increasing after each raid on a Fazbear property. But despite this increasing size, it has managed to escape observation and tracking efforts on multiple occasions. Due to its knowledge and behavior, its intelligence is currently unknown. It has made no attempts to communicate, besides threatening anything that approaches to leave it alone. And that concludes the FISA entries, with a climactic ending where all of the spirits from the past have breached from a pit of hell in what I can only assume is a final hunt for vengeance against William, as a giant amalgamation of animatronic parts treading through the countryside. They are now all one, and I have to assume they know where William is and have finally had enough of him getting away with his sins, especially since even now he's still killing people. It's an interesting alternate conclusion to the events of FNAF 6, and all of this is taking place before Fazbear Tycoon, which makes me wonder how that game would have continued from all this, right? I mean, giant mechanical monster wandering around the country is pretty big news. I wonder how that would have just been mentioned in the game at some point. As a result, it makes me wonder how the game's premise would have been. Where would we have left off? Because even though this is all happening before the game, would the game have taken place months after, maybe a year, maybe even more? I'm not too sure. So to recap, we have a giant animatronic mass hunting William, Henry's desire to stop William is reinvigorated, and other animatronics have been accumulating parts, either to become part of this Legion-esque animatronic amalgamation, or in their own search for William. Safe to say, the odds are stacked against William, but then again, it wouldn't be the first time he had to fight against all odds and survive. All of that, and I still have to wonder what's going on with Golden Freddy now. He's kind of evolved beyond the Golden Freddy persona, right? So he's more mysterious than ever, really. And at this point, it seems like his grudge is more so against Fazbear Entertainment and not William, at least based off his most recent behavior. We also have Fazbear Entertainment participating in this Fazbear Worldwide initiative with some unknown company that's also just randomly in there, and that's facing some difficulties thanks to Golden Freddy, or whatever they want to go by now, if they choose to not be Golden Freddy anymore, I guess, Cassidy, right? Overall, it serves up quite an interesting world, with familiar characters like Golden Freddy, William Afton, Henry, Ballora, Funtime Foxy, to characters that came from the books, like the Mimic and the Stitch Wraith. And it's unfortunate that it'll never come to pass, but sometimes that is the nature of game development. Regardless, this has been a great time re-looking into FISA and this game's supposed world, and just looking at all the work that went to just the world building for Fazbear Tycoon. Mind you, this was pretty much what they were working with for, I think, a year before, like in the middle of game development. They pretty much had this archive that was like I guess kind of like a prologue in a way for the game, right? As it was building this world, right? The lore, the events of Fazbear Entertainment, all the way from the 80s to now. It was quite intricate, and I have to say, impressive work to everyone that was a part of the game. But of course, I hope you did enjoy. Quite a different one, but it was fun trying to tackle this. Of course, the game page will be in the description below in case you want to take a look at it or see the archive for yourself. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Lets me know you're enjoying the content and want to see more of it. And with that said, I'll see you in another video. Take care.